And welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about Margaret Drumond. We don't have a ton of information about Margaret Drumond, especially her early years, so bear with me as we dig up the info that we do have. Margaret Drumond was born in 1330. Probably. Most sources say 1330, but disclaimer, Wikipedia says it's 10 years later in 1340, but that doesn't seem accurate because everywhere else I saw said 1330, so we're going to go with 1330. She was the daughter of Malcolm Drumond, a minor Scottish lord, and his wife, Annabel Graham, or Margaret Graham, probably a Graham. Her father, Malcolm Drumond, was at the Battle of Bannockburn, when the Scottish beat the English. Malcolm Drumond's contribution to that battle was caltrops. If you don't know what caltrops are, think large jacks, like the game. They hurt when you step on them. They could disable horses. He was proud of this contribution. It made such an impact on the battle that variations of the Drummond coat of arms have included caltrops. They put it right up front. He was kind of the Scottish caltrops guy. Their family motto was gang warily, meaning go carefully. So, good advice, especially when there's caltrops everywhere. Margaret was married sometime in her teens to Sir John Logie. They had a son in 1350 that they also named John, and this is one of the reasons I think the 1330 birth date is more accurate. When her son was born, she was either about 10 or about 20. So I don't know how we get from point A to point B exactly, but in 1350, Margaret was married to Sir John and had a new baby. To a decade later, when she was still married to Sir John, but having an active affair with King David II of Scotland. King David was also married to Joan of England, but the king had been held captive in England for 11 years. And when he was finally released, his English wife was like, no, I'm good here. Enjoy Scotland without me. England for life. So he did, with Margaret. It's hard not to make comparisons with the biblical King David and King David II and their love of the married gals. This affair was about 2 years old when word came from England that Queen Joan had died. This meant the king could remarry. And the king was 38 and still childless. Without kids, his line would come to an end. But his father was nearly 50 when David was born. In part because, like David, his mother, Elizabeth de Burgh, had also been held captive by the English, her for 8 years. So King David II decided to marry his mistress, but she was still married to Sir John for another year until her husband died or the marriage was annulled. All we know is that a year after the queen died, the king's mistress was no longer married. How convenient for them. But this caused some strife. David had no children, so his heir presumptive was Robert Stuart, David's nephew, who was also 8 years his senior. Robert Stuart was the only child of the king's half-sister, Marjorie Bruce. For that story, check out Marjorie Bruce's episode. So the Stuarts weren't happy with this arrangement. Robert was only heir presumptive because he was heir presuming King David had no sons. But now he was marrying his 33-year-old mistress. Eventually, the Stuarts submitted, and David and Margaret were married, February 20, 1364. Margaret has been depicted as very beautiful and very greedy. People got gold digger vibes. But also, haters gonna hate. Maybe she was in love. But she did receive a lot of land. And the Drummonds weren't going to put all their eggs in Margaret's basket. If she didn't have children with the king, the Stuart line would inherit the throne. So Margaret's maybe niece, though probably a slightly more distant relation, Annabella Drumond, was married to Robert Stuart, the son of the heir apparent, but we'll get back to her later. Margaret was never really popular, especially with the Stuarts. She was now 38 and still without children from the king, and King David had a new mistress named Agnes Dunbar. He wanted to marry her. The king had his second marriage annulled on March 20, 1369, 1 month after their 5th anniversary, on the grounds of Margaret's infertility. But remember, she had a child from her first marriage, and he had no children after 2 marriages. He likely was the infertile one. Margaret didn't take this annulment lying down. She went to Avignon, France, where the Pope was, and requested the Pope reverse the annulment. And Pope Urban did just that. Because she had a child from her first marriage. She wasn't infertile. So the king was back in his marriage, and any children he had with Agnes wouldn't be considered legitimate in the eyes of the church, so unfit to rule. Only about a year and a half later, King David II died, still without children. The king is dead. Long live the king. The new king was David's nephew, Robert Stuart, King Robert II. Margaret survived another 2 years when she died in France, possibly from the plague. It was going around. That's where we are now. If you listen to season 1, it's the plague years, and it's coming in hard. Pope Gregory XI paid for her funeral, and she is buried somewhere unknown, probably in France, probably at around the age of 43. And that is where I will leave it for now. What did you think of Margaret Drumond? We don't have much information on her at all, but to me she gives off Catherine Swynford vibes a little. I don't know King David II, but he doesn't strike me as the best partner. But maybe she was happy for the few years they had together. Share with friends, share with enemies. I'm not picky. Long live to all the queens out there. And until next week, bye.
You'll be remembered.
Thanks for listening.